Hello and welcome to the Atoll, your home for Waterworld fandom. In today's greatly anticipated video, we'll be uncovering the incredible story behind the greatest boat in filmmaking history, from early concept art to where the boats eventually ended up after the production of the film wrapped. Without further ado, here is everything we know about the Trimaran in Waterworld. But of course, we must start at the beginning with the earliest inception of Waterworld's hero boat, which was first born out of Peter Rader's original script, the first drafts being written in 1986, 8 years before the production of the film. These initial iterations described a more houseboat-like river barge called the Miranda, captained by a drifter named Morgan, the character that would eventually become known as the Mariner, played by Kevin Costner. Most interestingly, Morgan's boat is not only propelled by sail, but actual horsepower in the form of his animal companion, a horse that lives on the boat with him and turns a rotating yoke connected to a jerry-rigged paddle wheel. It's a ridiculous idea, especially considering the practicality of shooting on the open ocean with a large animal on the deck of a boat, but having read early versions of this Waterworld script for myself, I have to say the concept actually kind of works, with the presence of a horse adding a lot of levity to the story and even an emotional underpinning for Morgan's more empathetic character traits. However, when the script was eventually picked up by Largo Entertainment, backed by Universal Studios and put into pre-production, now producer and leading man Kevin Costner, along with director Kevin Reynolds and producer Charles Gordon, decided that the film needed a fresh new vision and hired acclaimed concept and storyboard artist Steve Berg. His first assignment? Create a hero boat for the story's main character, the Mariner. Not knowing much about boats, Berg immediately began to research by buying a pile of books and magazines featuring pictures of sailboats, as well as calling up shipbuilding companies for more information. Initially, he imagined the boat being a catamaran, a dual-hull design, but one of the companies that Berg called up, Jeanne, a French boat-building manufacturer, sent him a videotape featuring a 60-foot by 40-foot boat with a 3-hull design, a design known as a Trimaran. Berg was instantly sold. A trimaran would offer an exotic quality to the hero's boat, being ultra-fast and elegant in design, but also the 3 hulls would offer a large, stable platform for filming on. With notes from the film's producers, Berg's initial drawings pushed a more Swiss Family Robinson appearance, with the boat covered in thatched-together canopies, cranes, outlook posts, and a small hut-like cabin on the deck. However, in later drafts, Berg cleaned up the design, going for a more futuristic look, like a spaceship on water. At this time, it was also decided that the Trimaran would have another astonishing characteristic: the ability to transform. In peaceful waters, the Trimaran could cruise in a utilitarian trolling mode, allowing the mariner to dredge the ocean floor for treasures, being powered by an unassuming windmill system emerging from the boat's mast. But if the boat came under attack, the Trimaran could rapidly transform into a high-performance racing yacht that could outrun and outmaneuver any trouble that the mariner might find himself in. Taking inspiration from Japanese Transformer toys, Berg made a series of sketches that showed how the transformation would break down into a sequence of different stages, and these sketches were turned into rough 3D pre-visual animatics by Stefan Deschamps using Lightwave 3D on an Omega NewTek video toaster system. Supposedly, animatics of the Trimaran vs. Smoker scout plane, as well as animatics of the Mariner's movement about the boat, were also created but have never surfaced online. From these animations, which took 4 weeks to complete, a 3-foot model was created by physical effects designer Peter Chesney to further refine the design. The animatics and physical model allowed production designer Dennis Gassner to work out the timing and feel of the transformation, and also gave the movie's producers a tangible look at how the metamorphosis would come to life on film. With the vision of the boat being solidified, Gassner and Chesney approached the boat builders at Jeanne about recreating their design of the Pierre Warner racing sailboat into the hero boat for the film. Now, I could probably create an entire video on just the PR1er, but for the sake of brevity, it was a one-of-a-kind open ocean racing boat that, in 1990, placed first in the transatlantic Route de Rome, sailed single-handedly by French sailor Florence Atoll, the first woman to ever win this coveted racing event. In fact, the story was recently recreated using the same boat in the French biographical film Flow from 2023. Gassner and Chesney flew to France to meet with the team at Jeanne, headed by naval architect Bruno Belmont. There, they test sailed the PR1er, which during the test achieved a speed of 24 knots and just 18 knots of wind. They realized that it was less a boat and more a machine, perfect for the action sequences planned for the film. However, to achieve the Trimaran's transformation, it was determined that two boats would need to be built, one for trawling mode, which would also house the mechanisms for the transformation, and one for the high-speed mode when the boat was under full sail. When the team at Jeanne was first asked if they could take on such a project, they needed a glass of wine or two before they could confidently say yes. Not only would they have to create two custom boats, but to fit into the planned filming schedule, they would have to complete both of them in 5 months, rather than the year it would typically take to build one. In the end, the Jeanne team agreed to undertake the project, beginning work in September of 1993. To reduce weight, the original PR1er Trimaran was largely constructed of carbon fiber, but this was determined to be very expensive and unnecessary for the production of the film. So instead, Jeanne used a fiberglass and carbon fiber blend for the hulls of the boat and aluminum construction for the mast and boom, resulting in the boats weighing 8.5 tons apiece opposed to the 5.5 tons that the original racing boat weighed. But of course, some of the extra weight was also due to the specific requirements that each of the movie boats needed in order to visually tell the story of the mariner. From the beginning, the Trimaran was seen as a performer in the film and, in every aspect, reflected the downright ingenuity of the mariner. The Trimaran, built for trawling mode, would be propelled, thanks to movie magic, by an egg beater-like windmill with blades that would rotate around a shortened mast. These blades needed to be strong yet flexible and lightweight, designed to rotate around 15 revolutions per minute. A heat-cured, high-grade epoxy fiberglass was used to fabricate each of the three 25-foot blades. Two hydraulic motors on the top and bottom of the assembly rotated the windmill with the aid of computer software to help keep the motor synchronized, especially when starting and stopping in heavier winds. The movie logic was that as the blades rotated, a gearbox would convert energy to an underwater propeller or the rear winch, and as we see in this one scene, could also store energy to a car battery held below deck. In actuality, the trawling mode boat was driven by a 50 horsepower diesel engine. However, if the mariner finds himself in danger, the Trimaran could quickly convert from trawling mode to full sailing mode. The entire process would be kicked off by the mariner throwing levers at his standing control helm, which would activate a series of counterweights that would radically convert the boat in a matter of seconds. The transformation breaks down into the following actions. The rotor blades fold inward. The mast telescopes to over twice its height. The boom lifts and extends from a compartment in the deck of the ship. And finally, the sails unfurl and catch the wind, speeding the boat forward. And while the whole transformation appears to take only a matter of seconds, activated by flipping a few levers, it was in reality an intricately choreographed process that required lots of planning, engineering, time, and people to pull off. The transformation is activated via the control helm, from which the mariner can also steer the vessel, trim the sails, and trigger other various mechanisms. In actuality, the control helm was just a movie prop fashioned together partially from an old motorcycle handlebar and designed specifically to help Costner deliver an energetic and heroic performance from a standing position. After the rotor blades collapse down into the mast, a hydraulic motor and drum with pre-pressurized oil for a sudden rush of power extends the mast 30 feet to a total of 85 feet. As the mast goes up, a specially made, spring-loaded hatch built into the boat's deck releases a telescoping boom which extends to 30 feet in length, thanks to a collapsible 4-piece structure made from hand-bent aluminum, which also uses pressurized hydraulic power to elongate. The main sail, also packed into the hidden hatch, is pulled out with the boom while also being hoisted upward via a halyard line seemingly connected to a dropped counterweight. And as we can see from this unused shot in the rough cut of the film, the shape of the raised sail on the transforming version of the Trimaran actually has this odd squarish shape, perhaps fashioned this way to help with the unfurling from the hidden hatch. The forward jib sail also unwinds from a roller furling drum mechanism, and with that, the boat is now fully under sail. The Trimaran has completed its transformation. But as discussed earlier, once the transformation is complete, a second Trimaran was used to capture the boat sailing at full tilt across the open ocean. And as you might imagine, sailing a high-performance racing yacht single-handedly is the task of only the most world-class sailors. So the production team faced the challenge of creating the illusion that Kevin Costner was operating the Trimaran all on his own. To achieve this, it was decided that a crew of skilled sailors would operate the boat hidden below deck. The crew would consist of a pilot and a navigator in a forward compartment outfitted with joysticks similar to those on a remote control plane that would steer the boat's 3 rudders via a hydraulic system. 2 other crew members would be stationed in a rear compartment and in charge of the sail's rigging and winches. In order to see what was happening above deck, 5 cameras were placed in various locations on the Trimaran, 1 on the masthead facing forward, 2 off the stern, and 2 more off the bow. These cameras supplied a live feed to a series of small black and white monitors below deck, as well as a 14-inch monitor connected to a video switcher so that the crew could view crucial areas on a larger screen. And when the movie cameras were not rolling, or in the case of an electrical failure, the crew could pop their heads out of a hatch to see above deck themselves. The sailing crew communicated with the filming crew via radio. The forward compartment was outfitted with the ability to read data on things like weather, boat speed, and water depth. In addition, satellite navigation equipment could interface with an autopilot system, allowing the boat's navigator to program the Trimaran's heading. But with all of the specialized equipment to operate the boat remotely came added weight and the concern that it could potentially pitch pull the craft. In the end, it was decided that the air conditioning system that kept the crew below deck cool would be removed to reduce weight. The sails themselves were made from Spectra, an incredibly strong yet light textile. This material was also used for the deck netting in between the Trimaran's pontoons. However, in the film, the sails appear to be fashioned from a patchwork of different materials, looking as if they had been repeatedly repaired over many decades. This was achieved by the prop designers by painting on a mishmash of different cloth patterns, though keen-eyed viewers will notice that in a few shots you can actually see the Jeanne logo in the center of the main sail. Under full sail, the Trimaran could reach speeds of more than 30 knots, and according to the Making of Waterworld book, the remote systems below deck could be overrode, allowing the boat to be sailed normally above deck, even by Kevin Costner himself during low wind situations. And I should mention, the design of the Trimaran would have a great impact on the design of another key set piece in the film, that of course being the massive floating Atoll city. Since it was important to the story that the Trimaran be able to enter and maneuver around the Atoll's lagoon, the 2 designs were inseparable, with the dimensions of the Trimaran dictating the scale of the Atoll. For example, the Atoll's bifolding gates were designed to open and create a 55-foot path, just wide enough to allow the Trimaran to enter, and connected underwater with I-beams just deep enough to allow the Trimaran to smoothly sail over. In any case, with plans drawn for both versions of the Trimaran, the team at Jeanne worked rapidly to assemble the boats in France, completing work in February of 1994, with each boat costing around $1 million each. But of course, they now face the challenge of delivering the boats halfway across the world to the shooting location in Hawaii. Under normal circumstances, the Trimarans would have made the journey disassembled on the deck of a shipping freighter. However, with the tight filming schedule, it would take too long for the boats to arrive this way, so it was determined that the Trimarans would need to be shipped via air cargo in order to reach Hawaii in time for shooting the film. So, the Trimarans were trucked to Luxembourg and loaded onto a 747 air freighter. When the nose of the plane was closed, the boats were so tightly packed in that there was only a few inches to spare in the cargo bay. Given the enormous size of the 747 air freighter, the smaller runway of the Kona International Airport could not safely land an airplane of this size. Therefore, the runway was extended by a quarter mile. Now, there has been much rumor around who actually picked up the bill for the airport expansion, which reportedly cost around $4 million. But according to this Empire magazine article, it was Costner himself who footed the bill. Regardless, with the air freighter safely landed in Hawaii, the Trimarans were unloaded with hydraulic lifts and trucked to the empty sugar shacks in Kauai Harbor, where Belmont and 14 Jeanne employees worked to fully assemble the boats, which, during their construction, were given the names Manta and Quasimodo. 1 month later, the Trimarans were in the water, where the team continued to refine the rigging and various systems while the sailing crew trained to be ready for filming in summer of 1994. Kevin Costner also spent several weeks learning to use the boats as an extension of his acting by practicing the more physical aspects of his role, like swinging about the boat and using the control helm. With the Trimarans complete and the cast and crew assembled, it was now time for the cameras to begin rolling. But no one could predict all of the challenges that working on the open ocean would throw at the production of Waterworld. And this was apparent from the very first shot captured for the film, which was the iconic shot of the mariner's Trimaran entering through the gates of the atoll. As the gates swung open, the Trimaran began to enter the atoll lagoon when there was suddenly a snap as an underwater cable pulling the Trimaran broke. An overly eager safety crew immediately jumped into the water to help remedy the situation, but only added more to the confusion. In the end, it took 3 hours to reset the shot. It was then that everyone involved knew that this was not going to be like any other film they had ever worked on. And things proved exceptionally challenging when filming at sea, due to the distance from land, usually a 30-minute boat ride, and the constantly shifting nature of the ocean surface. Much of the camera work aboard the Trimaran was captured by Steadicam operator Mark O'Kane. A Steadicam is designed to allow a camera operator the freedom of handheld camera work, but with much smoother results. The specific rig used by O'Kane weighed 70 pounds and took great physical strength and endurance to use while bobbing around on the open ocean for hours on end. And since the equipment was so heavy, there became the concern that if O'Kane fell overboard with the Steadicam still strapped to his chest, he may sink to the bottom of the ocean. For this reason, the safety crew outfitted O'Kane with security lines and a small air canister so that he could breathe underwater, presumably giving him enough time to detach from the camera rig and not be drowned. The net decking of the Trimaran, while supplying a large surface area for the cast and crew to work, proved too bouncy to operate a camera on. To remedy this, the crew created 12 movable platforms made of wood, steel, and aluminum that could be positioned at various locations on the boat. But, unfortunately, these platforms could only be moved while the boat was docked in the harbor, so on certain days both Trimarans were equipped with different platforms in order to get more coverage during a single trip offshore. Throughout the production, lighting was a constant struggle, especially aboard the Trimaran. Early in the production, the crew attempted to use large lighting equipment on separate barges, but it was impossible to keep the setups consistent as the boats just ended up floating away from each other. Putting large lights directly on the Trimaran proved flawed as well, as they required generator equipment to run and cables bridging out to separate production boats. As a result, director of photography Dean Semler used mostly natural lighting with scrims hoisted into the boat's rigging to help control the sun's light, though these proved problematic too when the wind would gather. And because they mostly had to sail with the wind and shoot towards the horizon, the crew was very much at the mercy of the constantly changing light conditions, as well as the sky and ocean color, with subjects being very front-lit in the morning and then backlit in the afternoon, with the ocean becoming blindingly bright when the sun was lower in the sky and reflecting directly off the water's surface. But Semler did find some success using smaller lights that he borrowed from Peter Romano, who was in charge of underwater photography. These lightweight, waterproof 1200 watt lamps did not throw nearly as much light as the 12 or 18,000 watt lamps that are typically used on a large film production, but still became invaluable when providing fill for close-ups. But as we know, Waterworld's shooting schedule began to fall behind, with a typical day only yielding about 5 setups, as opposed to the 20 or 30 on a regular production. And so it was determined that they simply needed to keep moving forward and keep getting shots checked off, regardless of the quality and consistency of their lighting. As Semler said himself, if the story is working, people will not be aware of the constantly changing conditions in the final edit. As for the cameras and lenses used while filming at sea, Semler, who typically uses large Panavision cameras on his films, went with the compact Acton 35-3 for second unit coverage and the Panaflex Lightwave for use with the Steadicam rig. Interestingly, these boxes on the deck of the Trimaran, which look like set dressing, were actually used to hold camera equipment so that the crew would have to make less frequent rendezvous with support boats, especially during rough seas. Also, a camera known as a hothead, which uses a motorized remote control mount, was attached to the top of the Trimaran's mast to give a bird's eye view of the boat. However, only a handful of shots were captured with the hothead atop the mast because the rig unfortunately took half a day to set up. A new lens, the Panavision 27-68mm zoom lens, became an invaluable tool with its lightweight form and zoom capabilities, which allowed for a range of shots to be captured without having to change lenses, a process that could expose the camera to sea spray and as a result corrosion. In fact, keeping the cameras working correctly and uncorroded was such a high priority that a former Panavision technician was hired to stay on set and service the equipment every night. As for choosing the aspect ratio to shoot the film in, you might imagine that a very wide 2.35:1 cinescope frame would be perfect for capturing the vastness of the sea. However, shooting with anamorphic lenses was deemed too cumbersome, and so the production went with the American widescreen aspect ratio of 1.85:1, which in the end actually helped to more tightly frame the vertical shape of the Trimaran, which would have looked like a dot on the horizon if shot with anamorphic lenses. While the majority of the Trimaran scenes were captured at sea, some of the scenes were filmed in conditions that were easier to control. For example, the scene at night where basically the Trimaran is floating in a dark void was staged safely within the harbor. There's also the iconic shot of the Trimaran passing in front of the moon, which was actually a VFX composite created by placing a matte shot of the Trimaran over a telephoto shot of the moon. Also, any of the scenes taking place in the cabin of the Trimaran were in fact staged on a separate set built in the abandoned sugar shack that sat on the docks of Kauai Harbor. The set was dressed by set decorator Nancy Hay with aged items to show the mariner's scavenging way of life, which included everything from a toy soldier to a Fabergé egg. I also like the inclusion of this structure that runs along the ceiling, which is seemingly the underside of the compartment that holds the Trimaran's boom. Also below deck, we can spot the mariner's small bed bunk and a fold-down table, which was much more prominently shown in this piece of concept art and would have probably played a bigger role in the film if we had gotten the scene showing the mariner plotting the underwater cities on his homemade chart. In the novelization, there are quite a few mentions of the Trimaran having secret cubbies below deck, which helps to explain why the mariner has all his belongings still on board, even after he's been raided during his capture at the atoll. For the scene where the Trimaran is attacked by the Smoker scout plane, which I've covered extensively in its own deep dive video, in the shots where the mariner climbs the mast, a special gimbal rig was used to allow a dummy mast to be swung about, as the Trimaran itself proved to be so stable that it could not get the dramatic action that they desired. However, when the mariner is flung from the mast after the scout plane has freed itself, this shot was captured by dropping the actual boat while pulling a stunt double on a wire away from the boat into the ocean below. The end of this scene, of course, also results in the harpoon gun dropping down from the mast, taking out the Trimaran's starboard trampoline in the process. And I always found it amazing that in the film, the Trimaran's trampoline has already been repaired by the very next scene, now with this large stitched up hole in the center which can be faintly seen in a few overhead shots. In fact, throughout the film we can see the mariner constantly repairing his vessel. For example, in the extended cut, we can see him plugging up a hole in the side of the boat with some spare sail, or later in this scene where he's weaving together some new rope. Even Helen helps out, sewing patches around the bullet holes in the Trimaran's sail. It's also been written in a few places, like the movie's press kit, that the Trimaran has a solar-powered glue gun for repairs, though we never see this device in the film. But indeed, Costner himself did a lot of actual stunt work on the Trimaran, like the cable counterbalance system that sends the mariner soaring to the top of the Trimaran's mast. And who could forget this unbelievable helicopter shot of the mariner standing atop the mast spreaders while the boat flies across the ocean under full sail. On the first few attempts, the helicopter came in very close, within 20 feet according to Costner, scaring the actor and prompting him to yell, "Back the F up." Eventually, they got the shot, but just as they were about to call it a day, the winds picked up as they frequently did around Kauai Harbor, with Costner still lashed to the top of the mast. Unable to get him down, the crew had to sail to the leeward side of the island, where the winds were calm enough to safely retrieve the actor. In total, Costner spent 2 hours being swung around atop the Trimaran's mast. In Costner's own words, "It was a bad deal that could have been the end of me." But despite ample safety crew, this was not the only accident that happened on the Trimaran. For instance, the bowsprit broke off and sent Jeanne Tripplehorn and Tina Majorino underneath the boat, a story I covered in my last video. And while the production had its hardships, there were also many false reports by the media about the production of the film. One of many examples is when director Kevin Reynolds had 2 cameramen capture a downward tilting shot from the Trimaran's mast. After setting up, rough seas caused the mast to sway greatly, and it was determined unsafe to film the shot that day. Somehow, the media seized upon this and wanted to report that the 2 cameramen died out at sea. And really, this is just one small example of the Hollywood press completely creating false stories about the production of the film. In fact, the subject probably warrants its own video. But regardless, filming progressed through the summer and fall of 1994, and while the Trimaran's ability to transform is a true showstopper, I'd like to take a few minutes to point out some of the Trimaran's other unique features. Some of the first glimpses of the Trimaran in the film are during this quiet montage that plays while the mariner's on his scavenging dive underwater. Here we see the wind blow through an old harmonica, amplified by a funnel, and a wind chime made out of what looks like various plumbing nozzles, which alternatively in the novelization are described as being computer circuit boards. I really love the addition of these. It shows that despite the mariner being mostly focused on survival, he has a curiosity for beautiful things. He has art. And this is reinforced again later in the extended version of the film when we see the mariner listening to jazz on his portable CD player. But of course, throughout the film, the mariner is not the only one decorating, as Enola uses her drawing skills to help spruce up the Trimaran. Now interestingly, in the novelization, the mariner noticed Enola drawing on the hull of his ship with charcoal, something that also happens in the rough cut of the film, but he does not get upset about it, and it's not until he catches her drawing with crayon that he loses his temper. Going back to the Trimaran's opening montage, we get a glimpse into how the mariner lives aboard the Trimaran, with shots of things like his hammock. You can also see a large canvas canopy hung up, shielding the deck from the sun, a detail which is also present in the Trimaran's concept art and a handful of other shots in the film. Also, in a few pieces of production art, you may notice this large diamond-shaped structure on the stern of the ship, which was conceptualized as a method for capturing moisture out of the air. In another shot, we get a good look at this chair contraption with a bicycle crank attached to it. While I don't believe we ever learn the purpose of the bicycle crank, we do see later in the film that the mariner sits on this chair to operate the tillers mounted to the Trimaran's outer pontoons. In the scene at the barter outpost, we can see how the mariner can unfold these woven seats to create a scaffold from which Helen, Enola, and himself can throw their weight against, lifting the opposing pontoon into the air, clearing the smoker's nets. In the novelization, these extensions are described to be more like ladders that the mariner climbs out on in order to counterbalance the Trimaran. Another feature that lies on the outer pontoons are these crane-like structures on sliding rails, which we never actually see being operated in the film, though I've always suspected that the mariner must use them to lift heavier salvaged objects onto the deck of the Trimaran. There are also these two additional control stands on the crossbars that extend to the outer pontoons. While these control stands do not play as big a role as the center control stand, we do see several moments where the mariner uses these to raise and drop the Trimaran's sails. Moving to the stern of the boat, we of course have the Trimaran's rear winch system, which makes several appearances throughout the film. The mariner uses the winch to dredge the bottom of the ocean so that when the extended line gets snagged on a submerged object, he can dive and follow the line down to the sunken treasure. In front of the winch is an actual four-truck transmission, spun off screen by an electrical motor that simulates the transfer of power from the egg beater windmill to the rear-mounted winch. The winch also has an attached depth gauge and a handy hourglass timer which uses falling ball bearings, or dried fish eyes in the novelization, to gauge the amount of time the mariner has spent underwater. When the timer runs up, the winch begins to reel in the line. In the novelization, the line is attached to a trawling net, the contents of which are transferred into a salvage bag like the one we see in the film. I'm not exactly sure why there is this extra step involved with transferring found objects from the trawling net to the salvage bag, but I would guess it allows the mariner to be more selective with the objects he brings to the ocean's surface. In any case, in the Atoll battle scene, the winch also helps to maneuver the Trimaran. In the film, a line just appears to be already suspended across the Atoll lagoon, which the mariner uses to clothesline a smoker on a jet ski, but in the novelization, and also on this collecting card, the mariner actually shoots a line to the other side of the lagoon with the help of a harpoon gun. The winch's frame is also used to tie off the line that the mariner uses when fishing the mighty whalefin, and during the dive to the underwater city, we see that the winch's line is attached to the diving bell, though mysteriously, that line disappears after Helen and the mariner have descended to the ocean's bottom. And, speaking of underwater, the Trimaran also has a periscope in the boat's cabin that allows the mariner to see below the ocean's surface in the waters immediately around the center hull. In the novelization, the periscope is portable and operated through a wet well in the cabin of the boat instead. The sea growth around the POV of the periscope is actually a separate optical effect created by the VFX company Cinesite by shooting through a sonotube with fluff attached to the rim to simulate algae. Moving back above deck, we must of course highlight the Trimaran's famous bow-mounted harpoon gun. The harpoon gun is fired in two different scenes, during the Atoll battle to pull the Hellfire gunner boat and during the encounter with the Smoker scout plane. In both of these scenes, which I have covered in more depth in their own separate videos, the cable that attaches the harpoon to the harpoon gun in many of the wide shots was actually added as a computer-generated element in post-production by Cinesite and the computer film company. But you may be wondering, how did the Mariner originally acquire his Trimaran? Well, as discussed in this video I published a while back, little is known about the origins of the Mariner, but we do know from the novelization, as well as this newly surfaced working script, shout out Tim Neal on Instagram for sending this to me, the Mariner acquired his first boat from his abusive father, who he murdered, and has been on, quote, one boat or another ever since. So it seems to me that the Mariner most likely acquired the Trimaran either through trade or salvage and modified it to his liking over the years. The final unique feature I'd like to spotlight here is the deployable spinnaker kite. In times when the Mariner needs to make a quick getaway, like at the Barter Outpost, he can trigger a hidden cannon that launches a mortar shell. Once the shell is high in the air, it opens and a large box kite unfolds, giving the Trimaran an extra boost of speed. The kite is in fact a computer-animated model composited into the live-action shot by the VFX company Rhythm and Hues. However, it was first designed as a real physical model by internationally known kite enthusiast Tom McAllister, the brother of Michael McAllister, the visual effects supervisor on the film. The physical kite became an important tool that helped the computer animators get their minds around the difficult task of animating a kite unfurling in an organic and believable motion. But in any case, as we know, the extra boost from the spinnaker kite is not enough for the Trimaran to successfully escape from the Deacon, as when Helen and the Mariner emerge from their underwater city dive, they are surrounded by the Smoker army, and unfortunately, it is in this scene where the Trimaran meets its end. Helen and the Mariner flee capture from the Smokers by diving deep underwater, and at this, the Deacon gives the order to torch the boat. A gut-wrenching moment even for the Nord, who, in the novelization, is almost unwilling to carry through with the destruction of the Trimaran. After the Smokers have kidnapped Enola, Helen and the Mariner return to the ocean's surface only to find the burnt remains of the once proud boat. As we will learn later in this video, neither of the Trimarans created for the film were actually destroyed, so this wrecked version floating here in the ocean must be a prop created specifically for this scene. In the novelization, it describes the Mariner fashioning the remnants of the Trimaran into a raft, and just as all hope is lost, Helen and the Mariner are miraculously rescued by old Gregor in his dirigible, who foolishly praises them for burning the boat and creating a smoke plume that he could easily spot from his airship. In the extended cuts of the film and novelization, the Mariner actually sails back to the wreckage on a small boat he apprehends from the surviving atollers of New Oasis. In this scene, we get to see a little bit more of the burnt-out interior of the partially submerged ship, and this is when the Mariner makes the connection between Enola's drawings and the photographs he's seen in his precious National Geographic magazines. With the epiphany that Enola has in fact seen dry land for herself, hope is restored and the Mariner leaves the remnants of his once trusty steed, and this is the last time we ever see the Trimaran in the film. However, after the companions have made it to dry land at the end of the film, we do get introduced to the Trimaran's replacement as the Mariner prepares to set back out to sea. Abandoned by the ill-fated people that populated dry land, this wooden catamaran seems to have all the hallmarks of a Polynesian double-hulled voyaging canoe, with its upturned bow and stern pontoons, high sideboards, and crab claw sail rig. And with the knowledge that dry land is in fact the top of Mount Everest, the appearance of a traditional Polynesian-style vessel here in what would be modern-day Nepal definitely makes us wonder how the world's populations shifted and migrated as the waters rose, not to mention how, with the loss of modern technology, people reverted back to long-established methods of boat building and navigating the seas. In any case, principal photography of Waterworld wrapped on February 14th of 1995, exactly 1 year to the day that the Trimarans were delivered to Hawaii from France. And while the Trimaran is destroyed within the story of the film, I'd like now to take a look at where else the Mariner's iconic boat appears in Waterworld's greater expanded fictional universe, as well as its appearances in the film's various tie-in merchandise. Let's begin with what's probably one of the greatest pieces of Waterworld merchandise ever created, the Kenner Trimaran playset. Now, I've created an entire video on just this toy alone, but I'd like to quickly run down all the features packed into this playset here. First and foremost, the Kenner Trimaran sports the same ability to transform from trawling mode to quote, fast attack combat ship by folding in the spinning windmill blades, extending the mast, and releasing the sail and boom from the compartment in the center pontoon. The toy has rigging that allows the Mariner to launch to the top of the mast, and down on the deck below in between the pontoons is actual cloth netting. In the stern of the ship is the control stand, and along the outer pontoons are two spring-loaded harpoon guns, as well as the standing crossbow at the bow of the ship. And while the box does say that the toy is not intended for water use, it does have wheels on the bottom that allow it to sail along smooth, hard surfaces. The Kenner Trimaran is unquestionably one of the most unique action figure playsets from the 90s and the centerpiece of many a Waterworld collection. Moving along to the video games, let's first have a look at Waterworld on the Super Nintendo, where about half the stages have you piloting the Trimaran in between the swimming and platforming levels. The Trimaran stages themselves have two different gameplay loops: clear all the enemy stages and Atoll defense stages. In both types of stages, you eliminate various attacking smoker watercraft with an assortment of mines and firearms, which can be upgraded at the trading post. Interestingly, the Trimaran in this game is in trawling mode, with the egg beater windmill deployed and the canvas canopy covering most of the boat. In any case, as an award for completing the game, you're treated to this piece of original art showing the Trimaran, in trawling mode, approaching dry land, which, as we know, did not happen in the film. And, being a very similar game, the completed but unreleased Waterworld game for the Sega Genesis also has Trimaran stages, but only of the Atoll defense style. However, in the Genesis version, you are able to select where you sail to next in this overview map. Waterworld on the Nintendo Virtual Boy is completely focused on Trimaran combat, also using the Atoll defense style game loop, but this time in 3D, with a third-person perspective behind the Trimaran. Oddly, the Trimaran is really stripped down in this game, just 3 pontoons and a mast, no rigging, sails, or windmill to speak of. Alongside the Virtual Boy game, I should also shout out the unreleased Sega Saturn game, which was being developed by the same team. Though the gameplay seems it would have been very similar to the Virtual Boy game, the Saturn version would have had greatly improved graphics and some really creative weapons like flingable saw blades that would skim across the surface of the water. The Game Boy version of Waterworld also has Trimaran stages that take place in between the platforming stages. These Trimaran stages have you traversing the seemingly maze-like corridors of various atolls looking for an exit while avoiding mines and smoker jet skis. Strangely, the Trimaran only seems to be flying its jib sail in these sections. In any case, the Trimaran also appears under full sail in the opening start screen and also in the pixel art presented before starting level 4. Waterworld, the quest for dry land for home computers, sees a few short glimpses of the Trimaran entering the atoll in the live-action cutscenes before missions in which the Mariner is offered as a soldier for hire. Throughout the levels in the game, players may also notice the occasional Trimaran docked alongside atolls and enemy fortresses. However, I don't think these are specifically the Mariner's Trimaran, just other Trimaran-style boats that exist within the Waterworld universe. I also should mention the unreleased Waterworld PlayStation/3DO on-rail shooter game, which did get a released video trailer which shows several shots of the Trimaran. Now, I did an entire video on this unreleased game if you'd like to learn more, but supposedly the game also would have had open ocean sections where players could freely look around and gun down smokers from the deck of the Trimaran. Finally, at least for the video games, let's take a quick look at the Lost Waterworld internet game, Quest for the Mariner. In this game, we can actually spot from the recovered JPEG images a few shots of the Trimaran repurposed from the film, which is now seemingly being piloted by the player who, like the title of the game suggests, is in fact searching for the Mariner. A little odd also, considering the events of the game take place after the film and the Trimaran's destruction. Moving along from the video games but not leaving the arcade, let's have a look at the Waterworld pinball table where this illustration of the Trimaran dominates the center of the playfield. The Trimaran also appears on the right side of the back glass and makes a few appearances on the digital display alongside some of the Trimaran's accessories like the harpoon gun and the urine purifying machine. Shifting our focus now to the Waterworld Milton Bradley board game, all 4 players are racing across the ocean in their own individual Trimarans, represented by these beautifully illustrated playing pieces. The player can also choose at the beginning of their turn to raise their sails, transforming their Trimaran from trawling mode to full sailing mode. Doing this allows the player to roll 2 dice, making their movement about the board potentially twice as fast, which can present quite an advantage once the location to dry land is discovered. Turning our attention to the Waterworld Fleer Ultra trading cards, we do get a couple of cards that specifically highlight the Trimaran, including card 142 Trimaran from the main set that describes the vessel as one of the most fascinating boats ever seen. There's also card number 3 of 6 from the prismatic foil collection called Home Sweet Home, which states, quote, "The mariner's life revolves around his Trimaran." Similar to the trading cards, there are also Trimaran pogs. Here are the ones from my own personal collection. Looking now to the Children of the Leviathan Waterworld comics, the events of which happen chronologically after the film, we find the Mariner has acquired a new Trimaran, with this redesign taking on a more fighter jet-like sleekness, which was meant by the artist to look fast even as a drawn still image. The new Trimaran also has some additional capabilities like being able to submerge itself underwater, a nice little callback to the smoker ambush in the film, and the ability to become airborne, which is an homage to Gregor's dirigible. As for the Japanese manga, which is a fairly faithful adaptation of the film and novelization, we of course see the Trimaran drawn on many pages, which I suspect, in some cases, were reproduced from the photography captured during the production of the film. The Trimaran also pops up on a slew of tie-in soft goods, mostly t-shirts from what I've encountered over my years of combing eBay. This black t-shirt presents the Trimaran sailing in front of the moon, recreating that iconic shot from the film. Here's another that is very similar, but with the Trimaran over the sun with a simplified version of Enola's tattoo in the center, much like the movie's North American poster. One of my favorites is this more illustrated depiction of the Trimaran over setting sun, bordered by jet skiing smokers, chits, and the mariner's vest just kind of floating here. Likewise, here is another that uses that same illustration style, showing the Trimaran passing through the Atoll gates. One of the rarest Trimaran shirts I've encountered is this well-worn tank top that shows the Trimaran over Enola's full tattoo. Finally, let's take a look at Waterworld, a live Sea War spectacular, the stunt show which is still running at 4 Universal Studio locations across the globe as of the recording of this video. And lo and behold, there is no Trimaran, which totally makes sense since the events of the stunt show happen sequentially after the film and the destruction of the Trimaran, though that is not to say that the Trimaran is completely absent from the live show experience. At Universal Studios Hollywood, as guests queue up for the stadium's back entrance, they will pass this large model of the Trimaran displayed along the path. Now, even more interestingly is the plaque displayed in front of it, which states, Kevin Costner's Trimaran sailboat, actual working model from Waterworld, 1995. And this may give you pause because can you recall any shots in the film that use a scaled down model of the Trimaran? Well, friend of the channel Jamie Going and I actually believe that this shot that shows the underside of the Trimaran as the mariner is swimming across the Atoll lagoon is in fact a miniature docked up against a production boat. Yeah, if you really study the waves and air bubbles forming off the hull of the boat, it becomes fairly apparent that the Trimaran in this shot is scaled down. Also, when you increase the brightness of the shot, you can pretty clearly make out the inboard propeller on the regular sized boat it's docked up against, and it also appears that a crew member may have gotten in the shot here on the left of the frame. So it is our belief that the miniature Trimaran in front of the stunt show was used for this underwater shot and potentially other shots that were cut from the film and that we have never seen. Okay, so we've talked about the Trimaran as seen in the movie and the various tie-in materials, but you still may be wondering, whatever happened to the 2 boats created for the production of the film after the movie was completed? Well, let's get into that fascinating story right now. After the production of the film wrapped, Universal Studios knew that the 2 Trimarans used for the film still very much had value beyond their screen presence, and so decided that the transforming version would be dismantled and sent to Universal Studios Florida to be put on display, and the sailing version would be sold for the purpose of being refitted into a performance racing yacht. However, things did not quite work out that way. It has been rumored that a crew member accidentally took a chainsaw to the wrong boat. Rather than dismantling the transforming version, the full functional sailing version was cut up instead. In any case, this meant that the sailing version of the Trimaran was sent to Universal Studios Florida, and from what we know, the transforming Trimaran was sent to a salvage yard in San Pedro, California. The transforming Trimaran was purchased from the salvage yard around 1998 by boat racing enthusiast Howard Enola for, quote, pennies on a dollar. The boat sat idle for a number of years until a mast could be purchased from France and installed on the boat, replacing the movie prop telescoping mast. All of the additional movie-specific accessories were also removed and patched over. As Enola said himself, "I'm into racing boats, not movies." The boat was given the name Loe Real, and despite it being fairly heavy because of its fiberglass hulls, it was very much now seaworthy. Loe Real was then mainly docked in San Diego, California for the next decade, competing in many prestigious races along the western coast of North America. Supposedly, in the first race Loe Real competed in, her centerboard snapped off, and being that the boat was created primarily as a movie prop, the crew discovered that the core of the centerboard was only constructed of light 2x4s. The boat changed owners again around 2013, being purchased by an Australian named Des Murphy, who would eventually compete in the 2017 Trans-Pacific Yacht Race from Los Angeles to Honolulu. Loe Real would then be delivered from the United States to Australia, eventually being placed on blocks in a field just outside of Harwood Marina in New South Wales. From here, it was purchased, restored, and refitted by an Australian couple who renamed the boat Waterworld, with the movie's title painted along the outer hulls. She was put back in the water in 2022 and sailed down to Sydney, and as far as we know, is currently moored in Barry's Bay, a part of the Greater Sydney Harbour. According to the current owners, the boat would continue its life for the purpose of, quote, social sailing, and some coastal cruising. Now, going back to the sailing version of the Trimaran that ended up at Universal Studios Florida, this one sat on display for approximately 7 or 8 years in one of the park's man-made ponds and, as you can see on Google Earth's historical imagery, disappeared between 2002 and 2004. Supposedly, while the boat was on display, it was not very well maintained and fell into pretty bad disrepair, essentially rotting in the small pond it was anchored in. However, in March of 2004, the sailing Trimaran was purchased by a Florida man named Dale, who renamed the boat the Ugly Sister. Around this time, he posted in some old sailing forums, most of which have disappeared from the internet, about his ambitions to restore the boat for cruising with his son. However, since these old posts, nothing about the boat has surfaced for 2 whole decades, leaving many of us Waterworld enthusiasts to speculate that the boat may have been completely destroyed and disposed of. That is, until April of 2024, when the boat suddenly appeared on Facebook Marketplace. Being sold out of Naples, Florida, unfortunately the boat was in major disrepair, with the 3 hulls and their adjoining crossbeams all cut up into separate pieces. It also appears that an additional structure was built around the cabin in the center hull, and that all the unneeded movie-specific props were unceremoniously removed. And despite its current state and fairly high asking price, it does appear that the boat has sold. But that's as much as we know about the status of the Ugly Sister as of the time of this video being published, so we can only hope that the new owner will work to restore the boat to its former glory. In any case, it's a comfort to know that both boats still exist, and who knows, perhaps this video will have a follow-up someday where we can get a closer look at these incredible sailing machines. But anyway, that's where I'll conclude this video. Waterworld's Trimaran truly encapsulates the film's otherworldly appeal, being built both for survival and speed, with ingenuity that reflects the cleverness of our main character. And if you're like me, seeing this boat on screen in the mid-90s truly captured my imagination and ignited a lifelong obsession, not only with the film Waterworld, but for the craft and sport of sailboating itself. Also, before I go, I have to give a huge shout out to friend of the channel, Jamie Going, who has helped for years to keep a watchful eye on the status and location of the 2 sister Trimarans. If you've ever been down this rabbit hole, you will quickly realize there's been a ton of conflicting information put on the internet about these 2 boats, so a huge thank you to Jamie for helping me set this story straight. But yes, there you have it. That is everything we currently know about Waterworld's Trimaran. This marks another huge milestone for the channel, so if you enjoyed the video, please remember to give it a thumbs up and say hello in the comments before you go. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the Atoll. We're currently in the year of Waterworld's 30th anniversary, and I hope to have a few more exciting videos completed by the end of the year that you will not want to miss out on. Also, follow the Atoll on Instagram for even more Waterworld content, or reach out to me personally via the channel's email. But with that, thanks, as always, for joining me at the Atoll.